The first time I showed him my work, he laughed. It wasn't a hearty laugh, not even an amused one. It was more like a sound he couldn't control, an automatic reaction to something he didn't even care to understand. He didn't even bother to mask it. His eyes flicked down to the canvas I laid out on the dining table, then back to me. And he laughed again. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice so cold that I almost didn't recognize it. I stood there, frozen, unable to move. The sound of his laugh echoed in the room like a crack splitting the air. I didn't have the words to explain it, not then. I was too stunned, too caught in the sudden awareness that something was slipping away between us. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't show it. I couldn't. He was still my partner, still my husband, the man I thought understood me. We had spent years building something together, something I believed was strong. And yet, in this single moment, everything I had worked for in silence felt meaningless. I looked at the piece, my best work, the one I'd been saving for the right moment. It was a study in texture, colors bleeding into each other in delicate, calculated strokes. I had worked for weeks, every second pushing my limits, pouring my heart into it. The lines weren't perfect, but I hadn't wanted them to be. It was meant to be something raw and unfiltered. But now, it just felt exposed, you know. "I didn't think you were serious about this," he continued, his tone softening, like he was trying to reassure me. "I thought it was just a hobby." "A hobby?" The word stung like a slap across my face, sharper than his laughter. I had given up weekends, late nights, time that could have been spent building our business, just to do something he had never even bothered to understand. I swallowed. "It's not just a hobby," he smiled then, but it was tight, forced, like he was humoring me. "I didn't know you were this passionate about it. But you know, you're going to need something more commercial if you want to make a living off this. He gestured vaguely at the canvas. "It's not going to sell." I said nothing. I couldn't speak. I couldn't argue with him because the truth was, he was right. It wasn't commercial. Not by the standards of the world he lived in. The world he ruled with his charm and business acumen. The world I had helped build, the one where my passion for art had no place. He tilted his head, studying the canvas again. "Maybe try something more marketable, you know, like landscapes or still lifes, something people can hang in their offices. Not this." I wanted to scream, wanted to push him out of the room, but I didn't. I stood still, the quiet betrayal settling deep in my chest, too heavy to shake off. Instead, I nodded. "I'll think about it." He didn't seem to notice the coldness in my voice. He was already moving, turning back to the stack of papers in front of him, his mind already elsewhere. "Good. I know you'll figure it out. You always do." He said that like he was proud of me. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the canvas, turned it face down, and walked to my studio, each step feeling like it echoed through the house. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound small, insignificant. I set the canvas down, staring at it for a long time. The moment lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just about the art. It was about him. I had trusted him, believed in the partnership we had. The man I married was supposed to understand me, support me, not laugh at my dreams. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner. The way he'd always overlooked my work, always brushed it off as something secondary. I had made excuses for him, told myself that he was too busy, too consumed by his business. But now I knew the truth. He didn't respect me. He didn't see me as an equal. I wasn't just his wife. I was a joke. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. Not for him. Not for anyone. I would find a way to show him that I was more than what he saw, more than a hobby, more than a laugh. And when I did, it wouldn't just be my art that changed, it would be everything. ***, I never intended to look through his emails. I don't know why I did. But when the phone buzzed next to me, and his email account popped up on the screen, I couldn't resist. It was one of those small things. A glance at the subject line, a flick of my thumb, just enough to pull me in. Enough to make me wonder. He'd been acting differently lately, distant, distracted, cold even. I had chalked it up to stress, to the demands of his business. But now, sitting there in the glow of the phone screen, something didn't sit right. I unlocked it. The first email I clicked on wasn't what I expected. The subject line read, "Art Submission Review, Client's Thoughts." I felt a small twinge in my chest. It was a client I'd worked with months ago. Someone Harrison had been trying to impress for weeks. He told me I'd never get a chance to show my work there, that I wasn't ready. I hadn't cared much about the rejection. It was just another one of his opinions, another wall I had to climb. I read the email. "I understand your hesitation with her work. Frankly, it's not what we're looking for. It's too raw, too personal. Our clients prefer something easier to digest. We're not looking for introspection, more like something to hang in an office." Something clean, commercial, let me know what you think. I blinked at the screen, trying to make sense of it, but my mind refused to connect the dots. Harrison had always been dismissive of my art, of course. I knew he didn't like it, he had told me so, countless times. He never hid it. But this was something else, this was different, this wasn't just his opinion. This was something far deeper. I clicked on the next email. Just wanted to follow up on the artist you mentioned. I don't think her work is going to be a good fit. I'm sure she means well, but it's not the kind of art our clients expect. It's better for a smaller market, maybe a gallery if she's lucky. Let me know what you think. The pit in my stomach widened. I scrolled down to the next, then the next. The messages all said the same thing. Her work isn't commercial enough, her style doesn't fit our brand. I wouldn't invest in her, not even as a client. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe. I had given him everything, my time, my energy, my trust. I had believed him when he said he was helping me, that together we could build something. I thought we were partners equally invested in each other's success. But these emails, these betrayals, they shattered everything. He'd torn down the very thing I loved most, my art. I had spent so many nights working alone in my studio, painting while he worked downstairs, supporting him while he grew his empire. I had given up my own career to support his business, convinced that our success would be mutual. He had always been dismissive, yes, but I thought it was because he was too focused, too driven. I thought he was just too busy for my passion. But this was deliberate. He had been selling me a lie. I had tried to impress him. I had shown him the pieces I was most proud of, the ones that pushed my limits, and he had laughed, telling me they were too personal or too abstract. He never told me that he had been feeding my work to his competitors, using it as a way to diminish me, to keep me small. The weight of the betrayal hit me hard. I felt something inside me snap. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just stunned. This wasn't a simple dismissal. It was a calculated, malicious move. He had been undermining me from the very beginning. I wasn't just his wife, I wasn't just his partner. I was a tool to him, something he could use to further his own business agenda. I closed the emails, unable to stomach any more of his words, ***. The house was too quiet. I stood there, phone in hand, not sure what to do next. I had to process everything, but the thoughts came too fast. Too many revelations, too much pain. I walked into the kitchen, trying to steady myself. The silence was unbearable, thick and suffocating. I could feel the space between us growing, expanding, like a gulf that no words could fill. Then he walked in, his voice breaking through the stillness. What's wrong? I didn't look at him. I couldn't. The weight of his gaze was unbearable now. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to say something, anything. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was still processing the reality of what I had just found out. His footsteps echoed behind me as I grabbed a glass from the cabinet, slowly filling it with water. I wasn't thirsty. I just needed to do something, anything to stop my hands from shaking. Why are you looking at me like that? His voice was soft, but there was a hint of frustration in it, like he couldn't understand why I was suddenly so distant. I found your emails. I turned slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I looked at him, really looked at him. His face didn't change, not at first. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes, but it was gone before I could name it. You were right about me, I said quietly. I've always trusted you, but I see now that I was just a joke to you. My work was never worth anything to you, was it? His face tightened, but he didn't answer. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to come up with an explanation, a justification, but it didn't matter anymore. There was nothing he could say. I gave you everything, I whispered, and you used it to make yourself feel superior. You tore down what I loved, Harrison. His jaw clenched. I didn't mean to, don't. I cut him off. Don't try to make it sound better. I'm done. I'm done being your second choice. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for the right words. But none came. I turned away, the room suddenly too small for us both. I'm done. My voice was firm, cutting through the silence between us. There was nothing left to say. I didn't react. I could feel the weight of everything I'd discovered sitting heavy in my stomach. But I kept my face neutral, my hands steady. Harrison didn't notice. He never did. I could tell by the way he moved around the house, the way he spoke to me, that he thought things were just fine between us. I wasn't sure how long I stood there in the kitchen, holding that phone in my hand, staring at those emails like they were a foreign language. Long enough to know I had no intention of confronting him right then. That would have been a mistake. It was too soon. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary. The house felt unbearably quiet, even with Harrison in the next room, his voice a distant murmur. I felt the separation between us widening, stretching like an empty space too vast to fill. I took a deep breath. I wouldn't let my anger control me. Not yet. I had worked too long and too hard to let him see the cracks in my composure. He had no idea what I'd learned. No idea that his careless words and manipulations were already unraveling his world. Piece by piece, I couldn't afford to act in haste. What I needed now was patience, precision, strategy. I walked through the house without a word, without a glance in his direction. I couldn't afford to make it obvious, not yet. His voice called out from the other room, casual, unaware. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice even, almost too calm. "I'm fine." It didn't matter that inside I was boiling. It didn't matter that every word I'd read felt like a blade being twisted deeper into my chest. I couldn't let it show. He didn't deserve that satisfaction. He wouldn't even see it coming. I grabbed a glass from the cupboard and filled it with water, the sound of it pouring steady, measured. My hands were steady, but I could feel the tension coiling deep inside me. "You sure?" he pressed. His voice still too light. "You seem distant." "I'm fine, Harrison," I repeated. "Just a long day. I'll be in the studio later." He didn't seem to hear the underlying strain in my voice, or perhaps he didn't care to. He had always been self-absorbed, wrapped up in his own little world, his empire, his success. And I was just a footnote in that world. "All right. You're not coming to dinner?" he asked, his voice drifting in from the living room. "I'll eat later." The sound of his footsteps receded, and I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was time to think, to plan. The betrayal hadn't hit me all at once. At first, it had been a dull throb in the back of my mind, a nagging doubt. But when I found the emails, it was as if the floodgates opened, and suddenly everything was clear. Everything that had felt off, every small dismissal, every disinterested remark about my work, every time he told me I'm too busy or it's not that good, it was all a lie. He didn't just dismiss my art. He destroyed it. He had been building his business at the expense of my passion, and I had let him, but not anymore. I walked into the studio, letting the quiet envelop me. The room smelled of oil paint and turpentine, a familiar comfort. I could almost hear the brush strokes of my past work, the quiet confidence I'd once felt in my own hands. I couldn't let him take that away from me, too. Not now. I set to work, not on a canvas, but on something far more dangerous, a plan. It had to be meticulous. He couldn't suspect a thing. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer. Flipping it open, I started with the basics. What I knew. What he wanted. What he didn't know about me. He thought he had all the control, didn't he? He thought I would always just fall in line, support his empire, stand quietly in the background while he took all the credit. But he was wrong. I wasn't the woman who stood quietly anymore. I would make him regret the way he had treated me. But not with petty rage or childish revenge, no. I had learned better. The first step was to show him that I was capable of more than he could imagine. His assumptions about me were about to be shattered. I could feel the coldness in my chest grow as I mapped out my course of action. It was quiet work, the kind that required no immediate reactions, no outbursts. I knew Harrison better than he knew himself. I knew his weaknesses, his pride, his arrogance, his need to control, and I had every intention of using them all against him. But I wouldn't make the mistake of letting him know I was onto him. Not yet. The hours passed slowly. I worked through the evening, sharpening my focus, drafting outlines, building my strategy. By the time Harrison came to the door, asking if I was done, I was ready. Ready to let him believe everything was fine. That I was the same woman who had always stood beside him. "You sure you don't want to come out here? Dinner's getting cold." "I'm fine," I replied again. "I'll be out in a bit." I didn't need dinner. I didn't need his concern. Not anymore. I could feel the weight of everything I'd learned shifting inside me. But I didn't let it show. I wasn't the woman who cried over betrayal. I wasn't the woman who pleaded for respect. I was the woman who would take back everything he had stolen from me. And I would do it with a smile. I started small. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. But about reclaiming what was mine. He had no idea what I was capable of. No idea that I was already making moves. His arrogance blinded him, made him think I was too small to matter, too insignificant to break free. He was wrong. I had seen what he couldn't, my own potential, my own value. I reached out to the gallery. The same one I'd been too nervous to approach before. The one he'd mocked behind my back, telling me that my art wasn't commercial enough. Not the kind of thing people wanted to buy. Not the kind of thing that would fit into his carefully constructed world of polished successes and easily digestible products. I had never dared to send them anything before. I had always believed the lie he had fed me, that my work wasn't good enough. But that night, after hours of silent reflection, I found the courage to email them. Subject: Art Submission and Query. Curator's name: I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out to inquire about the possibility of exhibiting some of my recent work in your gallery. Attached are a few pieces for your consideration. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Best regards. My name. I hit send and immediately regretted it. My stomach churned as I sat back in the chair. What if they didn't like it? What if they thought I was a joke, too? But I couldn't turn back now. I couldn't go back to letting fear control me. It was time to take control. The next day, I didn't hear back, nor the day after. The silence felt suffocating, but I kept going. I started focusing on my next move, more determined than ever. If I had learned anything from Harrison, it was that power didn't come from asking for permission. It came from taking what was yours and showing up with authority. It was 4 days later when I finally got the email. Subject, Ray. Art submission and query. Dare my name. Thank you for submitting your work. I'm intrigued by the pieces you've shared. There's something raw and personal about your style that stands out. I'd like to discuss the possibility of an exhibition. Are you available for a meeting next week? Best regards, curator's name. I didn't let myself smile. Not yet. But my heart did a little dance in my chest. It was happening. I was no longer waiting for Harrison's approval. I was moving forward. I set up the meeting for the following week. I spent the next few days going over my portfolio, refining the pieces I would present. There was no room for hesitation anymore. The old me, the one who second-guessed every move, was gone. I had stepped into something new, something stronger. On the day of the meeting, I dressed carefully. No flashy colors, no risky choices. Just a simple black dress, something understated, elegant. I wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. I was there to make them see what they'd been missing. The gallery was in a quiet corner of the city, away from the busy streets. When I walked in, the soft lighting and clean, minimalist walls made it feel like a place where everything had its purpose. The curator, a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a serious expression, greeted me with a firm handshake. Ms. My name, I presume? He studied me for a second as if trying to place me. I nodded. Yes, thank you for seeing me today. He motioned to a chair across from him. Please, have a seat. I've taken a look at your work. It's different. I didn't flinch. At the word different, it was fine. It wasn't commercial or digestible, but it had value. More value than I had given myself credit for, and certainly more than Harrison had ever recognized. I'm glad you think so, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I've always believed that art should challenge people, make them feel something. The curator raised an eyebrow. I can see that, and I think there's an audience for it. We've been looking to add more contemporary pieces to our collection, something with more depth, more complexity. I think your work fits. I let the words sink in. This was it, my validation, but not from the man who had laughed at me, not from Harrison. It didn't matter anymore. This was my moment. I'm glad to hear that, I said. I've spent a lot of time honing my craft, and I believe it's time to share it with people who understand it. He smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. I think we're on the same page. I'd like to offer you an exhibition here. If you're interested, of course. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't let it show. I simply nodded. I'm interested. He extended a contract. It was a formality, a piece of paper I had to sign. But in that moment, it felt like so much more. It felt like the beginning of everything I had ever wanted, everything I had worked so hard for. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I signed it without hesitation. The curator looked at me, his expression thoughtful. I'm looking forward to seeing how your work resonates with our audience. You've got something special here. My name. I stood up, offering my hand in return. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I left the gallery feeling lighter, as though the weight I'd been carrying for so long had finally lifted. Harrison had always been too blind to see my worth, but that didn't matter now. I had found the right people, people who understood me. I didn't need his approval anymore. It was time for me to take up the space I deserved. I walked out of the gallery with my head held high, my mind already turning to the next step. I wasn't going to beg for validation from anyone, especially not him. Not anymore. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The email came at exactly 3:12 p.m. It wasn't a grand gesture, no confetti, no fanfare. Just a simple message from the gallery. Subject, your artwork. Solely stared at the screen for a moment, trying to make sense of the words. The sale was real, but the gravity of it didn't hit me right away. It wasn't the money, though that would certainly help. It wasn't the recognition. It was the realization that I had done it on my own. I had sold a piece of my soul, a piece of my work, without needing his approval, without his smirk or his dismissive tone. I'd always thought that if I could just make him see my art, just get him to acknowledge it, then things would be different. But now, looking at the words on the screen, I realized how foolish I had been. I had never needed his validation. All I had needed was to take control. My fingers trembled as I typed a brief response to the gallery, confirming the sale and setting up the details for shipping. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment settling over me, slowly at first, then all at once. I didn't celebrate. I didn't jump up or dance around the room. I simply sat there, in the quiet of my studio, feeling something stir inside me, a quiet power that had always been there, but had been buried beneath years of doubts and fears. I was in control now. The sound of footsteps interrupted my thoughts. Harrison. Hey, you? He said from the doorway, his voice casual, like he didn't even realize what had just happened. He wasn't even trying to mask the smugness in his tone. Got a minute? I didn't immediately answer. Instead, I closed my laptop slowly, giving him a moment to see the change in me. I hadn't planned on confronting him yet. Not like this. But his presence, his need for control, had been a constant weight on my shoulders. Now, it didn't feel as heavy. I just got an email, he continued, stepping into the room, his eyes scanning the space like he owned it. He probably thought I had been sitting here sulking. That's what I'd been doing all these years. After all, I didn't think he'd actually make the sale happen. I looked at him. I did. He froze. I didn't need to say more. The look in my eyes said everything. He opened his mouth, as if to argue, but then seemed to think better of it. That's good, he said finally, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm he normally displayed. When things went his way, you're getting somewhere, I guess. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Nothing he could say that would change the fact that I had made the sale. I wasn't going to play into his passive-aggressive games. He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering over to the corner, where my latest pieces were displayed. I guess this means I'll want to start taking this seriously, huh? Going to push more pieces out there. Try to make it a thing. The words felt like a challenge, as if he were testing me. I met his gaze, my voice steady. I've been taking it seriously, sure, he said, though he didn't seem convinced. He didn't get it. He hadn't seen the work, the struggle. The night spent working when he was off in his world, oblivious to everything but his own success. Well, don't forget, you still need me. I can help you with the business side, you know? The things you're not so good at. My chest tightened, but I didn't let it show. I think I've got that covered. He raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. He wasn't used to me pushing back. He was used to being the one who dictated the terms. You don't need me, then? He asked, his voice edged with something unfamiliar. Was it doubt? I shook my head. No, not anymore. The silence between us felt heavy, the weight of unspoken words lingering in the air. I could see the shift in him, subtle but unmistakable. The confidence that had always been his armor was starting to crack. He hadn't seen this coming. He hadn't expected me to stand up to him, to claim something of my own. You'll always need me, he said, his voice lower now, more uncertain than I had ever heard it. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't going to keep playing his games. I wasn't going to let him believe that I needed him, that I needed his approval, his validation. He lingered there for a moment longer, watching me, as if trying to decide whether to push me further. But then, with a tight-lipped smile, he turned and walked out of the room. I could feel the power shift, though. I could feel the change in the way he looked at me, the way he seemed to shrink back. He had underestimated me, and now there was no going back for him. I walked over to my desk, grabbed my phone, and checked the email again. My heart gave a small flutter, not because of the money or the recognition, but because I had done this on my own. I had taken control, and it felt good. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my life was mine again. I had made a decision, and it had paid off in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure what was next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to beg for validation from anyone, especially not Harrison. I have made my mark, and it was just the beginning, asterisk asterisk. It was quiet when he walked in, like everything around us had held its breath, waiting. I'd been expecting this, but somehow the moment still felt like a jolt, a spark setting everything into motion. Harrison didn't say anything at first. He stood there, just looking at me, his eyes scanning the room as if he didn't know where to start. I'd never seen him like this, hesitant, uncertain. He was always the one who had the words, the one who controlled the conversation. Not today. You sold them, he finally said, his voice low, almost tentative, to the gallery. I didn't flinch, I didn't turn away or soften my gaze. I stood there, my hands resting by my side. Calm, controlled. I'd already made my decision, and I didn't need to explain it to him. Not anymore. Yes, I said I did. His face tightened, a muscle in his jaw ticking. And you didn't think to tell me, or hell, ask for my help? No, I replied, letting the word land. I didn't. He took a step closer, his frustration starting to show. But there was something else in his eyes too, something unfamiliar, something that, for the first time in years, looked like fear. You think you can just do this without me? His voice Cracked on the last word. I didn't move, I didn't need to. The space between us felt smaller now. More fragile. I didn't need you to help me, Harrison, I said, my tone even but firm. I needed you to stop holding me back. The words hung there, thick in the air. He was silent for a moment, his gaze flickering between me and the floor, like he was trying to find his footing. He had never seen me like this, quiet, resolute, unmoved. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice lowering. You think you can just walk away from this, from us? I interrupted him. Not with anger, but with clarity. I'm not walking away from us. I'm walking away from you trying to control me. He took another step forward, closer this time, his eyes narrowing. You think I've been controlling you? You think I've been trying to keep you down? Yes, I said simply, the truth spilling out like it had been waiting to be said for years. You've been dismissing me, belittling my work, telling me I wasn't good enough all this time. You made me believe that I needed you to succeed. But the truth is, I never did. He recoiled slightly like the word stung. I didn't. You did, I interrupted again, softer now, but just as firm. You did it every time you told me my art wasn't good enough. Every time you said it was too personal, too abstract, not commercial enough. I spent years hiding pieces of myself for you. But I'm done. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, regret. Or was it fear? The vulnerability he wore now was something I had never seen. This was the man who used to hold all the power, the one who made decisions, who had the last word. But now, standing in front of me, his world was crumbling, piece by piece. And he wasn't sure how to react. I didn't know you felt like that, he said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. But I wasn't buying it. Of course you didn't, I replied, my voice calm, the clarity of it cutting through the air like a knife. Because you were too busy thinking about yourself, about your business, your success. You never once asked me how I was doing, how I was feeling. You just assumed I'd always be here, quietly supporting you. He took a breath, his hand running through his hair. I didn't mean for it to be like that. I could see him trying to rebuild the facade of control, but it was slipping, and he knew it. For the first time in years, I saw him unsure, not the confident, arrogant man who had always dictated the terms of our relationship, but a man who was losing his grip on everything he thought he could control. I stepped closer, and he didn't back away. It doesn't matter now, Harrison. What matters is that I've made a choice. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I've made a decision, and I'm moving forward with it. Without you, his eyes widened slightly, the realization hitting him. The fear was clearer now. It wasn't anger, it was something deeper, something more vulnerable than I had ever seen in him before. You can't just walk away from everything we've built, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The edge of desperation was there now. He hadn't expected this. I'm not walking away, I replied, my voice steady, resolute. I'm taking back what's mine. I'm claiming my own future. He seemed to take a step back, like he needed space to breathe, to process what was happening. And what about us? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. There is no us, Harrison, I said, my words final, cutting through the room. Not anymore. You never saw me. You never saw the woman I've become, and now, you never will. His face fell, and for a split second, I saw a man who was no longer sure of himself. I saw someone who realized he had lost control not just of me, but of the very thing he had taken for granted all these years. The one person who had always been there, quietly, patiently, waiting for him to notice. But now, that patience had run out. He didn't say anything else. Instead, he turned slowly, his back to me as he walked toward the door. He didn't slam it, didn't yell. He just left. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. The moment was mine. The power had shifted. And it felt like the first breath of freedom I'd had in a long time. The first sign of the fallout came in the form of an email from Harrison's biggest client. It wasn't a direct hit at him, not at first. But the tone was unmistakable, subtle, pointed, and full of what could only be described as doubt. I hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. But as I read the email, worded diplomatically but dripping with skepticism, I felt a cold satisfaction. The people who had dismissed me, who had ignored my work, had started to pay attention. It wasn't just the gallery anymore, it was the entire industry. The people Harrison had been so confident about, the ones who had played along with his act, his image, were now questioning his decisions, his taste, his judgment. I watched him that night, sitting in his office, his face etched with frustration as he read through the emails. He hadn't seen it coming. He thought I was a passing phase, a small bump in the road that would eventually fade. But when my name started appearing on the radar of his competitors, it wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of his unraveling. Another one, I asked, standing at the door of his office. My voice cool. He didn't look up. But I could. See the tension in his shoulders. It's nothing, he muttered, his fingers flicking over the keyboard. I watched him for a moment longer. It doesn't look like nothing, just people second-guessing, he said, his voice tight. I'll handle it. I knew better than to say anything else. Harrison was no longer the man who had the answers. The arrogance, the smug confidence that had once defined him was starting to crack. I didn't revel in it, not really. But I couldn't deny that I felt something shift inside me. The tables had turned, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one left in the dark. The next few days were a blur. Harrison was distracted, his usually smooth demeanor faltering as his clients, one by one, pulled away. His business was crumbling, but he didn't want to admit it. He couldn't. It wasn't just about the art anymore. It was about the years he had spent building his empire on the backs of others, dismissing their worth, their contributions, and now, people were starting to see that. They were starting to ask questions. They were starting to notice. By the end of the week, Harrison had lost to major clients. They hadn't said it outright, but the words between the lines were clear. They didn't trust his judgment anymore. They didn't trust him. I could see the change in him, the way his eyes flicked over to me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his jaw tightened when he passed by. He was waiting for me to slip up, to fall back into the role he had always expected me to play. He didn't know it, but I wasn't the same woman anymore. You're quiet tonight, he said, his voice laced with tension. Something on your mind? I looked up from my plate, meeting his eyes. No, I said simply, my voice steady, just watching. He didn't press it. Instead, he sat down across from me, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. I could see the weight of everything pressing on him, the loss of control, the loss of everything he had worked for. But it didn't matter, not to me. ***. I had made my decision, and now, the consequences were unfolding in front of me. The next few weeks only confirmed what I had suspected. Harrison's world was crumbling, and I was no longer a part of the structure he had built. It was almost poetic. In a way, the very thing he had dismissed, the thing he had thought was beneath him, was now the thing that was slowly taking him down. One afternoon, as I was in my studio, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I picked it up, unsure of what to expect. My name. A voice on the other end said. It was a woman, someone I didn't recognize. I'm with company name, and we've been following your work. We're interested in discussing a potential partnership. My heart skipped a beat. This was what I had been waiting for, the validation, the recognition, the chance to build something on my own terms. But it wasn't just that. It was a reminder that I had built this. Not Harrison, not anyone else. Just me. I'd be happy to discuss it, I said, my voice calm, confident. The conversation was brief, but by the time I hung up, I felt the shift inside me once again. I wasn't just taking control of my own career. I was setting the stage for something bigger, something Harrison hadn't anticipated. I didn't tell him about the call. Not yet. He didn't need to know. It was my move now. The next day, he came home late, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. I lost another client, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. They're all jumping ship. I didn't respond right away. I didn't have to. I could see the cracks in his confidence, the walls he had built around himself starting to crumble. He wasn't the same man who had laughed at my work. He wasn't the man who had dismissed me. Now, he was just a man who had lost everything he thought he could control. And I watched him, my heart cold and steady, as he sank further into the consequences of his own arrogance. For the first time in years, I felt no sympathy, no desire to comfort him. I had given him everything I could, and he had trampled on it. He had dismissed me. Now, it was his turn to feel what it was like to be discarded. And as the days passed and the cracks in his world widened, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice unfolding. He didn't know it yet, but the game had changed. And this time, he was the one who had lost. ***. It wasn't sudden. It didn't happen overnight. But over time, something inside me shifted. Each sale, each gallery showing, each new piece of recognition, their combined weight started to feel different. What had once been a quiet act of rebellion was now a steady, deliberate rise. And with every step, I felt the woman I had been, the woman I used to be, fading into the background. I wasn't the woman who had stayed silent, who had sat in the shadows of his world. I wasn't the woman who waited for him to validate me. I wasn't the woman who thought she needed him. I was a woman who took control, who demanded to be seen. I didn't need Harrison's approval anymore, not for my work, not for anything. The first time I really felt it, was when I walked into the gallery for my latest show. The crowd was a mix of art lovers, critics, and people who had once been content to overlook me. Now, they stood before my pieces, not with the dismissive glances they had given in the past, but with curiosity, with respect. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was the one who commanded the room. "You look good tonight," a voice said behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Harrison." I didn't look at him. "Thanks," I replied simply. "I'm busy." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the way he lingered in the air between us. He hadn't expected me to succeed like this, not without him, not without his influence. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, stepping a little closer. I didn't want to talk to him, I didn't need to. But I owed it to myself after everything to face him. I turned slowly, my eyes steady on his. "Why?" I asked, my voice sharp but controlled. "Are you here to congratulate me? Or to remind me of how far I've come without you?" His face faltered for a moment. A flicker of something I couldn't quite read crossing his features. Was it guilt, regret? Or something else entirely? "I don't know why I didn't see it before," he said, his tone quieter now. "I was too wrapped up in my own stuff. I thought you'd always be here, just part of the background, you know?" I watched him, my expression unchanged. "I wasn't part of the background, Harrison, you just didn't see me. You never did." His eyes flickered, and for a moment, he seemed like the man I had married. The man who had dismissed me, belittled my work. But there was something different now. Something in the way he looked at me, something like realization, or perhaps just the shadow of it. "I didn't mean to," he started. But I cut him off. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "You didn't mean to, and that's the problem." He paused, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered the years of patience, the quiet support I had given him, all the while feeling invisible. He had never really seen me, not for who I was, not for what I was capable of. "You don't get to apologize now," I said, my words steady, but laced with a clarity I hadn't known I had until this very moment. "Not now that I've built this on my own. You had your chance, Harrison, you had yours. And you chose to ignore me." "I never meant." "I know what you meant," I interrupted, my eyes narrowing. "You meant to control me. You meant for me to stay small, to stay in the background of your life, and now, I'm not small anymore. I'm not invisible. And I don't need you." He opened his mouth to say something, but I stopped him with a look, the look that said everything. "I don't need you," I repeated, my voice clear and final. "Not for my art, not for my life, not for anything." There was a moment of silence between us, thick with all the unspoken years. He wasn't the same man he had been when we started, but I wasn't the same woman either. "I was wrong," he said quietly, as though the words were a confession he hadn't planned to make. "I should have believed in you, in your work." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The moment wasn't for him. It wasn't even for me anymore. It was just the truth standing between us. The show went on without him. People continued to admire the work, to discuss it, to buy it. And I moved through the night with a quiet confidence that I had never allowed myself before. Weeks passed, and the sales kept coming. Each piece I sold felt like another small victory, not just over Harrison, but over the version of myself that had been too afraid, too timid to ask for what I deserved. It wasn't the money that mattered, not really. It wasn't the recognition, either. It was that I had reclaimed something far more valuable than anything he could offer me. I had reclaimed my own life, my own future. I wasn't living in the shadows anymore. And when I ran into Harrison again, months later, his face showed the same weariness I had seen in him before. He was tired, defeated, and the air between us felt different. "I heard you're doing well," he said, trying to sound casual. But I could see it in his eyes, the realization that I was never coming back to the place I'd been. "I am," I said simply. "Thanks for noticing." He hesitated for a moment, and then his gaze softened. "I never should have." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. "It's over, Harrison. You don't need to apologize. I've already moved on." He didn't say anything else. Instead, he just stood there, silent, watching me. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, but it didn't matter. He had made his choices, just as I had made mine. And in the end, it wasn't about the art. It wasn't about the sales or the shows. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about being the woman I had always been, but never fully allowed myself to be. And now, I was living it. Asterisk. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. There were no angry confrontations or grand gestures. It was just a simple action of filing. I didn't even give him a heads up. He was still caught up in his own world, pretending everything was fine, pretending that the cracks in our life didn't exist. But they did. They had been there for so long, and now, I wasn't willing to keep pretending. I wasn't willing to hold up the facade any longer. It was a quiet thing, the filing. It was a moment for me to breathe, to let go. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel the rush of triumph that he might have expected. What I felt was peace, finally. The same kind of peace that comes when you spent years waiting for something to break, only to realize it was already broken all along. I was sitting in my studio, one of my new pieces propped up against the Well, when the email came through, the separation papers, I had signed them earlier that day. Not with any real fanfare, but with the surety that had been growing in me for weeks, months. Maybe I hadn't needed his permission to move forward. I didn't need his approval. His phone rang from the kitchen, and I knew who it was before I even picked up the receiver. Harrison. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked across the room to my desk where the papers were waiting. The finality of it all felt like a weight lifting from my chest. He would never understand. Not really. He would never see what I had done, what I had built. But it didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for his understanding anymore. I wasn't waiting for his apology, his validation. I had taken my life back. I heard him pacing outside the door. A few minutes later, the creaking of the floorboards unmistakable. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I knew what he wanted to say. He would beg. Or he would try to rationalize. Or worse, manipulate me into thinking this was some sort of mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was my decision. When he finally entered, his face was set in that familiar frown, the one that used to make me shrink back. Not anymore. Now, it just looked tired. Tired and defeated. His arrogance had been replaced with something more like desperation. But it was too little. Too late. You filed for separation, he said, his voice tight, almost cold. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The truth was in the air between us, thick and undeniable. I could feel the weight of it in his words. But I didn't flinch. I didn't allow myself to feel his weight anymore. Is that what you're really doing? He continued, stepping closer, trying to meet my eyes, walking away from everything we've built. For me? I exhaled slowly, my eyes not leaving the piece in front of me. I didn't need to look at him. I've already walked away. Harrison. This is just paperwork. His gaze sharpened, frustration clouding his face. You think you can just erase all of this? All of us, after everything we've been through? After everything I've done for you? I finally looked at him. Then, and the look on his face was so familiar. So twisted in the way he still thought he was the one who had been wronged. But the truth had never been clear to me. You didn't do anything for me. Harrison, I said. My voice quiet, but cutting through the tension. You did everything for yourself. You never saw me. You never saw what I was capable of. And now, you're mad because I'm not waiting around for you to notice. I could see him struggling to find the right words, but none of them came. His mouth opened. But it was like he was speaking from a distance. There was nothing left to say. Not really. He had burned all those bridges years ago with his dismissiveness, his arrogance. I never meant to hurt you, he said finally, his voice soft now, the edge of anger fading into something that felt closer to defeat. I know, I replied, standing up now, feeling the finality of it all settle into my bones. But you did. I let the silence stretch between us for a moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal in the way I used to. I had healed. Piece by piece. His words didn't wound me the way they once had. I don't know what you want me to say. Harrison, I continued, my voice steady. I'm not asking for anything from you. I've already made my choice. And you? I shook my head, almost pitying him for the first time in years. You've lost me. You lost me when you thought I was someone you could control. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was waiting for me to change my mind, to go back to the woman who would always forgive him, always put his needs first. But that woman was gone. She had died the moment I stopped letting him dictate who I was. He didn't say anything else. He didn't even try to argue. There was no more fight in him. For the first time, I saw him for what he really was, someone who had used others to build himself up. Someone who couldn't understand why he was falling apart. You'll be fine, I said softly, almost as an afterthought. You always are. But I'm done. I turned back to my work, to the art I had reclaimed as my own. The art that had been dismissed for so long. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything from him. For the first time in years, I was free. ***. The final papers were signed and the divorce was official. I didn't feel any need to mark the occasion with tears or celebration. It was just the next step. The inevitable one. I had already moved on. Long before the ink dried on the document. Harrison was no longer part of my world, not really. The man I had spent years building a life with was now just a ghost in the corners of my memory. A shadow that couldn't touch me anymore. The betrayal, the pain, the years of second-guessing it had all led me here. And here was where I was meant to be. I stood in my new studio, the sun streaming in through the large windows, casting light over the canvases scattered across the room. This was mine, this space, this life. My art had become something I could claim as my own, something real, something that didn't need to be validated by anyone, especially not Harrison. I had worked for this, every piece a testament to the woman I was becoming. My brushstrokes had become sharper, my colors more vibrant, bolder. I had no one to impress but myself. And that was enough. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at it, expecting it to be an old acquaintance, maybe a client or someone I had worked with in the past. When I picked up, I didn't expect to hear Harrison's voice. "I need to talk to you," he said. His tone clipped, impatient. He always thought he had the right to my attention. I took a breath, steadying myself before I responded. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then a frustrated sigh. "You're just going to walk away like this? You're really done?" I looked around the studio, at the space I had built, at the life I was carving out. "Yes, Harrison. I'm done. I've moved on." "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice lowering. "Trying to coax me into something, anything. You need me." "I don't need you," I replied, my voice calm and final. "I haven't needed you for a long time." He was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. Maybe he was still trying to figure out what had happened. What went wrong? Maybe he thought this was some kind of phase, something that would pass. But it wasn't. "I guess I was wrong about you," he finally said, his voice softer, almost regretful. "I didn't see you for who you really are." "I'm glad you see it now," I said, my voice steady. "But it doesn't matter anymore." He didn't respond right away, and for a second, I thought he might say something else. But there was nothing more for him to say. I wasn't the same woman who had once waited for him to notice, to value me. I was someone different now, stronger, clearer. "You're right," he said after a long pause, almost as if accepting it. "I should have seen you." I didn't say anything in return. What was there left to say? The woman I had been was gone. The woman I was now didn't need him to admit his mistakes. "I guess I'll let you go then," he said, his tone now resigned. "Goodbye, Harrison," I said, my voice as calm as it had ever been. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I hung up before he could respond. I didn't need any more closure. I didn't need him to make this right. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, and the path I had carved for myself, the pieces I had sold, the respect I had earned. Those were the things that mattered now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and planning. There was a new exhibition coming up, one that I was proud of. I had worked hard for this, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone derail me now. When I looked at my work, at the bright colors and bold strokes on each canvas, I saw someone who had learned to stand on her own, someone who had found her voice, and refused to let anyone silence her. Every painting, every piece was a declaration of independence, a statement that I had done this myself. No one could take that away from me. The gallery curators had started calling more frequently, and there were offers coming in from other clients. They saw the value in my work, and more importantly, they saw me, not as a wife, not as an afterthought, but as an artist, as a woman who had a future beyond the man who had once tried to hold her back. I had found my place in the world, and it was mine alone. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Harrison. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about proving that I could live my life on my terms, not his. The next morning, I stood in front of a new canvas, the one that had been waiting for me. It was large, sprawling, a piece that stretched across the entire wall of my studio. I had a vision for it, something deep and personal, something that represented everything I had been through and everything I had become. I picked up the brush, my hand steady, and began to paint. It was the beginning of something new, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. The world was mine to shape.